They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but nobody warned me it would taste this sweet. My ex wife, Evelyn, thought she was humiliating me when she sent that wedding invitation, marrying a rich white man just weeks after our divorce was finalized, like I was some kind of consolation prize she'd finally traded up from. She wanted me to see her upgrade, to watch from the sidelines as she stepped into the life she always thought she deserved. But what Evelyn didn't know was that while she was busy judging me by my work clothes and grease stained hands, I was quietly building an empire she never bothered to ask about. The wedding invitation wasn't meant to celebrate, it was meant to destroy me. Instead, it became the stage for the most satisfying moment of my life. If you're watching this, hit that subscribe button and tell me where you're from, because you're about to witness how a simple mechanic turned his ex wife's perfect wedding into the moment she realized she'd divorced a millionaire. The pen felt heavy in my hand. Strange how something so small could close a chapter that took 3 years to write. The clerk's desk at the county records office was scratched wood, worn smooth by thousands of signatures just like mine. I pressed down and wrote my name one last time next to Evelyn's. "Take care, Mr. Cole," the clerk said. She was older, maybe 50, with kind eyes that had seen this scene play out more times than she could count. Her voice carried the weight of someone who knew that sometimes being free came with a price. I nodded and slid the papers back to her. The marriage was over. Done. 3 years, reduced to stamps and filing fees. Walking to my truck in the parking lot, I pulled out my father's old watch. The gold was worn thin around the edges, but it still kept perfect time. Dad gave it to me before he passed, told me it would remind me that some things last if you take care of them. I slipped it into my pocket and drove to the shop. Reed Cole Auto Repair sat on the corner of Franklin and 3rd, squeezed between a diner and a dry cleaner. Not much to look at from the outside, but Dante and I had built something solid here. The bay doors were open, and I could hear the familiar sounds of work: air tools hissing, music playing low, the steady rhythm of honest labor. "Marcus!" Mrs. Patterson waved from beside her minivan. She was a regular, brought her car in every 3 months like clockwork. "Thank you so much for squeezing me in. The kids have practice at 4." I grabbed my coveralls from the hook and got to work. Under the hood, everything made sense. Problems had solutions. Parts that were broken could be fixed or replaced. It was simple, clean logic. The minivan needed new brake pads and an oil change. Nothing fancy, but Mrs. Patterson acted like I'd saved her life when I handed her the keys. "You're a godsend," she said, pressing an extra 20 into my hand. "My husband says you're the only mechanic in town who doesn't try to sell him things he doesn't need." After she left, Dante wandered over with 2 bottles of beer. "Long day," he said. "Want to grab dinner at Mickey's?" I shook my head. "Rain check. Got some things to take care of." Dante studied my face. We'd been friends since high school, started this shop together 5 years ago. He could read me better than most people. "Everything okay?" "Yeah, just need to get home." He nodded and didn't push. That's what I liked about Dante. He knew when to talk and when to listen. The duplex I rented was quiet when I got home. Too quiet. It was funny how you could live in the same place with someone for 3 years, then suddenly it felt like a museum. Everything looked the same, but all the life had been sucked out of it. I made a sandwich and sat at the kitchen table, listening to the mail slot clatter. Bills, probably. Maybe some flyers for pizza places I'd never order from. But when I walked to the front door, there was a thick cream envelope sitting on top of the pile. My name was written across the front in Evelyn's careful handwriting, the kind of handwriting they taught at the private school where her parents sent her. My hands were steady as I opened it. Inside was a wedding invitation, heavy cardstock, gold lettering, the works: Evelyn Hart and Tristan Vale, 4 weeks from Saturday at the Rosewood Country Club. At the bottom, in that same careful handwriting, no hard feelings. I set the invitation on the table and stared at it. 4 weeks. They'd waited exactly long enough for the ink to dry on our divorce papers before sending out invitations. That wasn't an accident. That was a message. I touched my father's watch through my pocket and tried to steady my breathing. Some things you see coming from miles away doesn't make them hurt any less when they hit. Wednesday morning came early. It always did at the shop. I was wiping down the workbench when Dante's truck pulled into the lot. He climbed out with 2 cups of coffee and the kind of grin that meant trouble. "You look like hell," he said, handing me a cup. "Thanks. You're a real friend." "That's what I keep telling people." He leaned against the workbench. "So what's eating you? And don't tell me it's nothing, because you've been scrubbing that same spot for 5 minutes." I stopped wiping and pulled the invitation from my back pocket. Dante read it twice, then looked at me like I'd grown a second head. "She sent you a wedding invitation? To her wedding? 4 weeks after your divorce? Apparently. Man, that's cold. Even for her." He handed the invitation back. "You going?" I shrugged. "Haven't decided." "Well, if you do go, go calm. Don't let her get under your skin. That's what she wants." A customer's car pulled into the bay, saving me from having to answer. We spent the morning working, the familiar rhythm of routine keeping my hands busy while my mind wandered. Around noon, a courier van pulled up. Outside, the driver got out and walked to the dry cleaner next door, arms full of packages. When he came back, he was shaking his head. "Wrong address," he muttered, climbing back into his van. A few pamphlets fell out when he opened the door. I walked over and picked them up. Rosewood Country Club, wedding and event services. The courier was already gone, so I kept them. Not sure why. Maybe because seeing the place on paper made it feel more real. Or maybe because some part of me was already planning to go, even though I hadn't admitted it yet. That night, I spread everything out on the kitchen table: the divorce papers, the wedding invitation, the venue pamphlets, my father's watch. The watch ticked steady in the quiet kitchen. "Some things last if you take care of them," Dad had said. I wondered if he'd meant more than just timepieces. Thursday's lunch break found me in the shop's small break room scrolling through my phone while eating a sandwich. My coworker Jerry was doing the same thing, grinning at his screen. "Check this out," he said, turning his phone toward me. It was a social media post from Evelyn's mother, Veronica. A photo of Evelyn and 3 other women at some fancy restaurant, all smiles and champagne glasses. The caption read, "Some girls know how to upgrade. So proud of my daughter for finding her perfect match." The comments were full of heart emojis and congratulations. A few people I recognized from Evelyn's circle had chimed in with things like, "She deserves the best," and "About time." Jerry was still grinning. "Damn, bro. Your ex-wife's mom really went for the throat." I handed his phone back and finished my sandwich in silence. The message was clear enough. I was the downgrade. Tristan was the upgrade, just in case anyone missed the point. My phone buzzed with a text from Lily, Evelyn's younger sister. "You deserved better." I typed back, "Be well." After work, I was under the hood of a delivery van when the driver struck up a conversation. He was a chatty guy, maybe 60, with the kind of weathered face that came from years of honest work. "You do good work," he said. "This van's been running like a dream since you fixed the transmission last month." "Appreciate that." "Hey, you know anything about that big wedding at Rosewood next month? I'm supposed to deliver flowers, but the manager there acts like his business is too fancy for guys like us." I kept my eyes on the engine. "Can't help you there." "Probably better off. Rich folks think their money makes them better than everybody else. But money can't buy class. You know what I mean?" I knew exactly what he meant. That evening, I walked downtown to grab dinner at a small place I liked. The food was simple and good, and nobody bothered you if you wanted to eat alone. On my way back to the truck, I passed a wine bar with big windows facing the street. Through the glass, I could see a group of women at a corner table. Expensive dresses, perfect hair, the kind of laughter that carried even through the windows. Evelyn sat in the middle of the group, her back straight, hands moving as she talked. Veronica was there too, nodding along to whatever story was being told. They looked happy, content, like people who'd never worried about paying rent or fixing their own cars. I kept walking. No point in looking back. Friday night was different. I wasn't looking for trouble, but somehow it found me anyway. I was downtown again, this time to pick up parts from a supplier who stayed open late. The sidewalks were busy with people heading to restaurants and bars, the weekend energy starting to build. I bent down to tie my shoe near the corner when a woman came out of a bar across the street, phone pressed to her ear. She looked frazzled, the kind of stress that came from trying to manage too many moving parts at once. No, no, the centerpieces are supposed to be ivory, not white, she was saying. There's a difference, and Mrs. Hart will notice. She paced back and forth in front of the bar, one hand holding the phone, the other gesturing like the person on the other end could see her. When she hung up, she looked ready to scream. That's when she noticed me. "Excuse me," she said, walking over. "You look familiar. Do you work at that auto shop on Franklin?" "I do. I'm Nessa Brooks. I think you've worked on some of our vendor vans." The name clicked. She was a wedding planner, one of the ones who used smaller suppliers instead of the big companies. We'd serviced a few of her delivery trucks over the years. "Right. How's business?" "Busy. Too busy." She glanced back at the bar. "I've got a wedding tomorrow that's been nothing but headaches. The groom's friends are—" She stopped herself. "Well, they're not the easiest people to work with." Through the bar windows, I could see a group of men in expensive suits. They had that look, loud, confident, the kind of guys who thought volume made them important. One of them was gesturing at a waitress, clearly unhappy about something. "That your groom?" I asked. Nessa nodded. "Tristan Vale. He's particular." I knew the type. Everything had to be perfect, but perfect on their terms, with their vision, and everyone else better fall in line or get out of the way. "Good luck tomorrow," I said. "Thanks. I'll need it." I was halfway back to my truck when the bar door opened again. More voices spilled onto the sidewalk, and I recognized one of them immediately. Evelyn stepped outside, phone in hand, looking around like she was waiting for someone. She wore a blue dress I'd never seen before, probably cost more than I made in a week. Her hair was longer than when we were married, styled in loose waves that caught the streetlight. For a second, our eyes met, the kind of moment that stretches longer than it should, where both people are trying to figure out what to say. "Marquise," her voice was careful, neutral. "You look, well." I nodded. "Evelyn." She glanced back at the bar, then at me again. "I wasn't sure you'd. I mean, I didn't know if you came downtown much anymore." "Sometimes." An uncomfortable silence stretched between us. 3 years of marriage, and we were standing on a sidewalk, talking like strangers. "Well," she said finally, "I should get back inside." I watched her walk back to the bar, heels clicking on the concrete. Through the window, I could see her rejoin the group. Tristan stood up when she approached, put his arm around her waist, pulled her close, making sure anyone watching knew she belonged to him now. I got in my truck and drove home. Saturday morning found me in Dante's small office behind the shop. The space was organized chaos, invoices pinned to a bulletin board, delivery schedules written on a whiteboard, coffee cups that had been forgotten for days. "Check this out," Dante said, tapping the whiteboard with a marker. Red lines connected different pickup and delivery points across the city. "We're handling logistics for half the upscale events in town now." I looked closer at the route map. Reed Cole Logistics LLC was printed at the bottom of several invoices. It was the side business we'd started 2 years ago, keeping it low profile while we built up regular customers. Remember that classic car subcontract we picked up last month? Dante continued. The one with the vintage Bentleys and the Lamborghini? Yeah. Turns out one of the wedding planners we work with is pulling inventory from our pool for a big event tomorrow. Nessa Brooks. I remembered my conversation with Nessa the night before. She was handling Evelyn's wedding. Small world, I said, getting smaller. Dante showed me a vendor list with our LLC logo at the bottom. We're not the main event, but we're in the mix. Transportation backup, vendor coordination, that kind of thing. It was strange seeing our company name connected to Evelyn's wedding, even indirectly. We'd built the logistics business slowly, professionally, staying under the radar while we established relationships with reliable clients. You okay with this? Dante asked, reading my expression. Business is business. That evening, I went through my closet looking for something decent to wear. Not that I decided to go to the wedding, but if I did go, I wanted to look respectable. I found a gray suit I'd bought for job interviews 3 years ago. Still fit, still looked good with a crisp white shirt. I set it aside next to a small envelope marked Lambo, client hold. The envelope contained cash I'd been saving. Not for anything special, just because sometimes you wanted to drive something other than a pickup truck. Dante had mentioned that one of our classic car clients was willing to rent out their Lamborghini for special occasions. Nothing flashy, just a guy who liked nice cars and didn't mind sharing them with people who appreciated quality. I wasn't planning anything dramatic, just good to know the option was there. Sunday morning, I went to early service at the church down the street. It was a small congregation, mostly working folks and retirees who'd lived in the neighborhood for decades. After the service, I was walking to my truck when Mrs. Alvarez, my elderly neighbor, flagged me down in the parking lot. Marcos, how are you, mijo? Mrs. Alvarez was 85 and stubborn as a mule. She still drove her 1998 Honda to church every Sunday, the grocery store every Wednesday, and her doctor's appointments when she absolutely had to. I'm good, Mrs. Alvarez. How are you? Oh, getting old. The car's been making that noise again. I'd been maintaining her Honda for free since I moved into the duplex. It wasn't charity. She always tried to pay me, and I always found an excuse to give the money back. She reminded me of my grandmother and some things you did because they were right. Bring it by the shop Tuesday. I'll take a look. You're a good man, Marcus. Your grandmother raised you right. She said that every time she saw me, and every time it made me stand a little straighter. In a world where people judged you by your bank account or your zip code, Mrs. Alvarez saw character. It mattered more than she knew. My phone rang as I was unlocking my truck. Lily's name on the screen. Marcus, I'm sorry to bother you. Her voice was low, like she was trying not to be overheard. I'm at Mom's house helping with wedding stuff. What's up? She's moving everything up. The timeline, the schedule, all of it. She wants to make sure tomorrow is perfect. Lily paused. She's nervous about something. I could hear voices in the background. Veronica's among them, sharp, giving orders. I'm sending you the ceremony timeline, Lily continued, just in case well, in case you decide to come. I don't want you to be surprised by anything. My phone buzzed with a text, a detailed schedule of tomorrow's events. Ceremony at 2:00, reception at 3:30, dinner at 6. Everything planned down to the minute. Lily, I said, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Evelyn's my sister, but what she did to you wasn't right. Mom's making it worse with all her comments about upgrading and finding suitable matches. It's embarrassing. I appreciate that. If you come tomorrow, just be yourself. You've got nothing to be ashamed of. After she hung up, I sat in my truck for a few minutes, studying the timeline she'd sent. Everything was choreographed, designed to impress. The kind of wedding where image mattered more than the actual marriage. That evening, I drove to the shop and let myself in through the back door. It was quiet in a way that felt different from the duplex. This place had purpose, even when nobody was there. I walked through the bays, past the tools and equipment that Dante and I had bought piece by piece as the business grew. We'd started with almost nothing, built something solid through long hours and honest work. I pulled out my father's watch and checked the time. Tomorrow was coming whether I was ready or not. Standing there in the quiet shop, I made my decision. I would go to the wedding, not to cause trouble or make a scene. I would go quietly, watch from the back, and let the day speak for itself. Some truths didn't need to be announced, they just needed to be lived. The week passed like a slow motion movie. Every day felt longer than it should, each hour stretched tight with anticipation. I kept busy at the shop, but my mind kept drifting to Saturday, to the wedding, to what I was walking into. Wednesday morning, Mrs. Alvarez brought her Honda in as promised. The noise was nothing serious, just a loose belt that needed tightening. But she insisted on making me coffee while I worked, the way she always did. "You seem different today, mijo," she said, studying my face with the sharp eyes of someone who'd raised 6 children. "Something on your mind?" I tightened the belt and checked the tension. "Just work stuff." Hmm. She didn't believe me, but she didn't push either. That was another thing I liked about Mrs. Alvarez. She could read people, but she knew when to give them space. Thursday afternoon, Dante was busy coordinating weekend staffing when his phone rang. He answered with his usual, "Read Cole logistics. This is Dante." I was balancing the books when I heard him say, "Yeah, we can cover that. No problem." When he hung up, he looked thoughtful. "What was that about?" I asked. "Vendor coordination for Saturday. Apparently, someone needs backup transportation for a last-minute guest change." Saturday, the wedding. "You take it," I said. "Marcus, it's fine. Business is business, remember?" Friday evening, I took a drive through the city. No destination in mind, just needed to move. The streets were busy with weekend energy, people heading out for dinner and drinks, the kind of freedom that came with Friday night. I found myself driving past the neighborhood where Evelyn and I used to live together. The apartment complex looked the same, but smaller somehow, like a place I'd visited in a dream. At a red light, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the timeline Lily had sent. Ceremony at 2 Rao. Reception immediately after. Everything timed to the minute, choreographed for maximum impact. My phone buzzed with a text from Lily. "I may step away during vows. This whole thing feels wrong." I typed back, "Do what feels right." The light turned green and I drove toward home. Tomorrow was coming whether I was ready or not. Saturday morning arrived cold and clear, the kind of October day that made everything look sharp and clean, like the world had been polished overnight. I was up early, even though the ceremony wasn't until 2. Nervous energy, I guess. Or maybe just wanting to control the parts of the day I could control. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with the newspaper, but the words wouldn't stick. My mind kept jumping ahead to the afternoon, to walking into that room full of people who thought they knew exactly who I was. Around 9, I drove to the shop to check on a few things. Dante was already there, clipboard in hand, looking over delivery schedules. "Big day," he said without looking up. "For some people." "You sure about this?" I pulled my father's watch from my pocket and checked the time. "Too late to change my mind now." Dante set down his clipboard and looked at me directly. "No, it's not. You don't owe her anything, Marcus. You don't owe any of them anything. This isn't about owing. This is about knowing who I am." He nodded slowly. Dante understood. We'd been friends long enough that he could read between the lines. "If you need anything today," he said, and I mean anything. You call me. I will. At 10, I drove to the venue to get a sense of the place. Rosewood Country Club sat on 50 acres of perfectly manicured grounds, the kind of place where everything looked expensive and felt exclusive. I parked at the far edge of the lot and watched the setup crews work. Flowers being carried in by the armload, tables being arranged and rearranged, a small army of people making sure every detail was perfect. The building itself was old money elegant, red brick and white columns, the kind of architecture designed to impress. Through the windows, I could see crystal chandeliers and polished floors that probably cost more than I made in a year. This was Evelyn's world, had always been her world. For 3 years, she tried to make it mine too, but it never quite fit. Like wearing a suit that was almost the right size but pulled in all the wrong places. I drove home to get ready. The gray suit fit better than I remembered. I'd lost a little weight since the divorce, mostly from eating less and working more. But the suit still looked good with a crisp white shirt and a simple black tie. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and tried to see myself the way other people would. A black man in his late 20s, dressed for a wedding he probably shouldn't attend. Some people would see trouble walking in. Others might see exactly what they expected to see. But when I looked in the mirror, I saw my father's son. A man who'd learned to work with his hands, who'd built something from nothing, who understood that respect was earned through actions, not words. I slipped the watch into my vest pocket where it belonged. At 11:30, I drove back to Rosewood. This time, I parked closer to the building and walked to the entrance. A few staff members were making final preparations, adjusting flowers and polishing already perfect surfaces. "Morning," I said to a server arranging chairs on the terrace. She looked up and smiled. "Good morning. You're early for the ceremony." Just wanted to get a feel for the place. "It's going to be beautiful. Mrs. Hart has exquisite taste." I nodded and walked toward the garden area where the ceremony would take place. Rows of white chairs faced an altar decorated with ivory roses and baby's breath. Everything was elegant, expensive, designed to create the perfect backdrop for the perfect wedding. "Marcus?" I turned to see Nessa Brooks walking toward me, clipboard in one hand, radio in the other. She wore the kind of professional smile that wedding planners perfected, warm but controlled. "I didn't expect to see you here so early. Thought I'd check out the setup. Impressive work." "Thank you. It's been..." She glanced around, making sure nobody was close enough to overhear. "It's been challenging, but we're on track." A server approached us, young guy, maybe 22, with the kind of eager energy that came with new jobs. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said to Nessa. "The flower delivery van is making that noise again. Should we call someone?" Nessa looked frustrated. "Which van?" "The white one by the service entrance." I walked over to take a look. The van was idling rough, engine coughing like it was fighting for air. Classic symptoms of a dirty fuel filter. "Mind if I take a look?" I asked the driver. He popped the hood and I spent a few minutes checking the obvious culprits. The fuel filter was clogged, but there was a quick fix that would get them through the day. "Try it now," I said, after making a small adjustment. The engine smoothed out immediately. The driver grinned and thanked me. When I turned around, I noticed 3 guests walking toward the entrance. They'd been watching me work, probably wondering who the guy in the gray suit was fixing delivery trucks. "Appreciate you keeping our vans running," the server said as we walked back toward the garden. Some guests heard him. I saw them exchange glances, the kind of looks people give when they're trying to figure out where someone fits in the social order. "Marcus!" Lily's voice came from behind me. She was walking quickly across the lawn, wearing a pale pink dress that looked beautiful but uncomfortable. "Hey, Lily!" She glanced around to make sure nobody was listening, then pressed a small piece of paper into my hand. "Your seat assignment," she said. "I moved you away from Mom's friends. You'll be in the back, which is probably better anyway." Thanks. How are you doing? Really? I looked at her carefully. Lily had always been the honest one in the Hart family, the one who said what she thought instead of what was expected. I'm fine. How are you? Nervous. This whole thing feels like a performance, like we're all pretending to be characters in someone else's story. Before I could respond, Veronica's voice cut across the garden like a blade. Lily, where have you been? We need you inside for photos. Lily squeezed my arm quickly. I'm glad you came, she whispered, then hurried toward the building. I walked to the back of the ceremony area and found a spot where I could stand, against the garden wall. From there, I could see everything without being obvious about it. More guests were arriving now, expensive cars pulling up to the valet station, women in designer dresses and men in custom suits, the kind of people who belonged at Rosewood Country Club. By noon, the energy had shifted. What started as controlled preparation was becoming barely contained chaos. I was standing near the terrace when I heard raised voices from inside the building. Through the open doors, I could see Veronica gesturing sharply at someone, her face tight with frustration. The ribbon is wrong, she was saying to Nessa. I specifically ordered ivory, not cream. There's a difference. Nessa's professional smile never wavered, but I could see the stress in her shoulders. I understand your concern, Mrs. Hart. We can have the correct ribbons here in 30 minutes. 30 minutes? The ceremony starts in 2 hours. A server approached me cautiously. Excuse me, sir. Are you with the wedding party? Guest? The groom is asking if someone can check the champagne temperature. He says it's not cold enough. I looked toward the bar area where Tristan stood with 3 other men, all of them wearing matching expressions of entitled annoyance. Tristan was talking at a server, pointing at glasses like he was giving orders to a subordinate. I'm sure your staff can handle it, I said. The server nodded and hurried away, but I could see the tension building. These were good people trying to do their jobs, and they were being treated like furniture. My phone buzzed. Text from Dante. All smooth. You good? I typed back. So far. At 12:30, I was walking past the side terrace when I saw Evelyn standing alone by the railing, looking out at the garden. She wore a white dress that probably cost more than my truck, her hair swept up in an elaborate style that looked perfect and untouchable. For a moment, she looked like the woman I'd married 3 years ago, young, hopeful, genuinely happy about the future. But then she turned slightly, and I could see the tension around her eyes, the careful way she held her shoulders. She was performing too, playing the part of the happy bride for an audience that expected perfection. I started to walk away when she noticed me. Marcus, her voice was quiet, careful. I stopped. Evelyn, I wasn't sure you'd actually come. Here I am. She looked around to make sure nobody was watching, then walked closer. You look good. The suit, I mean. It looks good on you. Thanks. An uncomfortable silence stretched between us. 3 years of marriage, and we were talking like polite strangers at a cocktail party. This is harder than I expected, she said finally. What is? Seeing you here, knowing that. She stopped herself. Never mind. Knowing what? She looked at me directly for the first time. Knowing that I hurt someone who didn't deserve it. Before I could respond, the distant sound of string music started drifting across the garden. The quartet was beginning their prelude. I should go, she said. Photos. I watched her walk back toward the building, heels clicking on the stone pathway. She moved with the practiced grace of someone who'd been taught to carry herself properly. But there was something brittle about it now, like she was holding herself together through sheer force of will. 1 o'clock brought the first real crisis. I was standing near the garden entrance when Nessa's radio crackled to life. She listened for a few seconds, then her face went pale. What do you mean pending? She said into the radio. It was supposed to clear this morning. I couldn't hear the response, but I could see Nessa's professional composure starting to crack. She walked quickly toward the building, speaking quietly but urgently into her radio. A few minutes later, she emerged from the venue office looking like someone had just told her the building was on fire. Problem? I asked as she passed. She stopped and looked around, making sure nobody else was listening. Payment issue. The final balance for the venue is stuck in some kind of bank hold. 48 hours minimum. What does that mean? It means if we can't show proof of payment, they could shut down the reception. She rubbed her forehead. The groom says it's just bank lag, but the venue wants assurance. Tristan chose that moment to appear, walking toward us with the kind of confident stride that suggested he'd never encountered a problem he couldn't solve with volume and intimidation. What's the holdup? He demanded. Mr. Vale, I explained the situation. The venue needs to do their job. I don't pay people to create problems. Sir, they're just following protocol. Then fix it. That's what I pay you for. He walked away without waiting for a response, leaving Nessa standing there with her radio and her clipboard, looking like she was about to scream. Give me 5 minutes, I said. I walked to a quiet corner and called Dante. Reed Cole Logistics, he answered. It's me. I need a favor. Name it. Can you send a vendor letter to Rosewood Country Club? Standard payment coverage based on existing contracts. For the wedding? Yeah, nothing fancy, just business to business confirmation that we're good for any logistics coverage. Marcus, 5 minutes, Dante. That's all I need. He was quiet for a moment. Done. Sending it now. I walked back to where Nessa was still talking on her radio, stress written across her face in bold letters. Check your email in 2 minutes, I said quietly. She looked at me like I'd started speaking a foreign language. What? Reed Cole Logistics has a standard vendor agreement with your company. Check your email. Her phone buzzed. She opened the email, read it quickly, then looked at me with something that might have been relief. This covers the logistics portion, she said, which gives the venue confidence that their vendors are solid. She nodded slowly, understanding. It wasn't a solution to the payment problem, but it was a bridge. Proof that the people handling the important details were reliable, which meant the venue could afford to be patient with the financials. Thank you, she said quietly. Just business. But as she walked back toward the venue office, I noticed several guests had been watching our conversation. Word traveled fast in social circles like this. By the time the ceremony started, people would be asking questions about the guy who seemed to have solutions when everyone else had problems. 2 o'clock arrived with the precision of a military operation. The guests were seated, the quartet was playing, and everything looked perfect from the outside. I stood at the back of the garden, hands folded, watching as the wedding party took their positions. Tristan walked down the aisle first, flanked by his groomsmen. He looked confident, successful, like a man who'd never doubted that he deserved everything he was about to receive. His suit was custom tailored, probably cost more than most people's rent. Everything about him screamed money and status. Then the music changed, and Evelyn appeared at the back of the garden. She was beautiful. I had to admit that. The dress, the flowers, the way the afternoon light caught her hair, everything was perfect. Exactly the kind of wedding photo that would look amazing in magazines. But as she walked down the aisle, I found myself watching the faces in the crowd instead of the bride. The women leaning forward to get a better look at the dress, the men checking their phones, the calculated smiles and polite applause. For just a second, Evelyn's eyes found mine. A brief moment of contact across the garden, bride to guest, past to present. Then she looked ahead toward Tristan, toward her future, and the moment was gone. The ceremony itself was everything you'd expect from a Rosewood Country Club wedding. Beautiful words about love and commitment, delivered by a minister who specialized in elegant occasions. Vows that had been written by someone else, polished and perfect. I listened to Tristan promise to love and cherish Evelyn, to support her dreams and stand by her side. The words sounded good. They always did at weddings. Then, it was Evelyn's turn. She spoke about finding her perfect match, about building a life based on shared values and common goals. Her voice was steady, controlled, the product of good schools and careful training. But I noticed something the other guests probably missed. When she talked about shared values, her eyes didn't quite meet Tristan's. When she mentioned their future together, her smile looked practiced rather than spontaneous. She was performing, playing the part of the happy bride because that's what everyone expected to see. The minister pronounced them husband and wife, and Tristan kissed his new bride with the kind of confidence that suggested ownership rather than partnership. The crowd applauded, cameras flashed, and the recessional music began. As the wedding party walked back down the aisle, I moved toward the side exit. No need to get caught in the crowd of well-wishers and congratulations. I'd seen what I came to see. But, as I was leaving, an older gentleman, maybe 70, with the kind of bearing that came from years of responsibility, approached me. "Excuse me," he said. "Weren't you the young man who helped with the gate earlier?" I'd held a garden gate open for some guests who were struggling with it. Nothing dramatic. "Yes, sir. Thank you for that. Small courtesies matter." He extended his hand. "Robert Whitman. I'm on the club's board of directors." "Marcus Cole. Are you family?" "Friend." He nodded thoughtfully. "Well, Mr. Cole, it's nice to meet someone who understands that a gentleman helps where he can, regardless of the occasion." As he walked away, I noticed several other guests had observed our interaction. Word would spread. By the time the reception started, people would be asking questions about who Marcus Cole was and why Robert Whitman had made a point of speaking with him. Sometimes the truth revealed itself in small moments. You just had to pay attention. The reception began at 3:30 with the kind of controlled elegance that money could buy. Crystal glasses caught the afternoon light, fresh flowers adorned every table, and servers moved through the crowd with practiced invisibility. I stood near the bar, nursing a club soda and watching the social dynamics unfold. Wedding receptions were like theater. Everyone had a role to play, lines to deliver, an image to maintain. Tristan and Evelyn made their grand entrance to polite applause. They looked perfect together, like figures on a wedding cake, all smiles and graceful waves, playing their parts for the audience. The receiving line formed quickly, guests waiting their turn to offer congratulations, air kisses, and the kind of compliments that sounded sincere but meant nothing. I stayed where I was, content to observe from a distance. "Ladies and gentlemen," Nessa's voice came over the sound system. She stood at a small podium near the head table, microphone in hand, looking much more relaxed than she had an hour ago. "Before we begin the reception festivities, I'd like to take a moment to thank everyone who made today possible." She went through the usual list: the florists, the musicians, the catering staff, professional acknowledgments delivered with warm gratitude. "I'd also like to give special thanks to our behind the scenes logistics partners who kept everything running smoothly today," she continued. "Reed Cole Logistics and their team were invaluable in coordinating vendor services and ensuring seamless delivery." A few heads turned in my direction. Word had gotten around about the van repair, the vendor letter, the quiet competence that solved problems without drama. "Their professionalism and reliability made my job much easier," Nessa added, then moved on to announce the dinner service. But the damage was done, or rather, the foundation was laid. I noticed Veronica's expression tighten as she processed what she'd just heard. Her eyes found me across the room, and for a moment, the mask of polite society slipped. She was trying to figure out how the pieces fit together. Near the bar, a woman in an expensive purple dress was talking to her husband in low, urgent tones. That's the logistics company she mentioned, Reed Cole. And that man over there, didn't you see him fix that delivery van this morning? Social circles like this operated on information. Who was connected to who had influence, who mattered. The mention of Reed Cole Logistics had introduced a new variable into the equation. 20 minutes into the cocktail hour, Veronica made her move. She approached with the kind of smile that could cut glass, flanked by two women who looked like they'd stepped out of a country club magazine. Everything about their approach screamed confrontation disguised as politeness. Marcus, Veronica said, her voice carrying just enough volume to attract attention. I wasn't expecting to see you here today. Mrs. Hart, I hope you're enjoying yourself, though I have to say, I'm surprised you chose to attend. Most people would find this situation uncomfortable. The two women with her exchanged meaningful glances. They were here to witness whatever humiliation Veronica was planning to deliver. I'm fine, I said simply. Are you? Because from where I stand, it looks like you're trying very hard to insert yourself into situations where you don't belong. She was talking about the van repair, the vendor coordination, trying to make it sound desperate instead of helpful. I was just helping where I could. How noble. Her smile turned sharper. Though I imagine you must feel quite out of place here. This is a very different world from, well, from your usual environment. The implication was clear. Know your place. Don't embarrass yourself by pretending to belong. A small crowd was gathering, drawn by the tension in Veronica's voice. Wedding receptions were supposed to be celebrations, but people could smell conflict from across a room. You should probably leave before you embarrass yourself, Veronica continued. This is a family celebration, and I think we both know you're no longer family. I looked at her for a long moment. 3 years of marriage to her daughter, and this was how she chose to remember me. Not as the man who'd worked extra shifts to help pay for Evelyn's graduate school. Not as someone who'd been respectful, reliable, faithful. Just as someone who didn't belong. I won't, I said quietly. Excuse me? I won't leave, and I won't be embarrassed. The confidence in my voice seemed to catch her off guard. She'd expected submission, maybe anger, not calm certainty. Well, she said, recovering quickly, I suppose some people don't know when they're not wanted. Mrs. Hart. Robert Whitman's voice cut through the tension like a blade. The board member who'd spoken to me earlier approached our group with the kind of authority that came from decades of leadership. Mr. Whitman, Veronica said, her tone immediately shifting to deference. How lovely to see you. Indeed, I was just telling my wife about the young man who helped several guests earlier today. He turned to me. Mr. Cole, isn't it? Yes, sir. Excellent. Veronica, I hope you appreciate what a gentleman you have in your circle. True courtesy is becoming increasingly rare. Veronica's smile looked like it had been carved from ice. Yes, well, in fact, Whitman continued, I was just discussing with the club's operations manager how impressed we were with the logistics coordination today. Seamless vendor management, professional communication, the kind of behind-the-scenes excellence that makes events like this possible. He was talking about Reed Cole Logistics, about the vendor letter that had solved the payment crisis, about the quiet competence that kept things running while everyone else focused on appearance. Mr. Cole's company? Whitman asked directly. Before I could answer, one of Veronica's companions spoke up. Company? I thought he was a mechanic. The words hung in the air like a challenge. In their world, being a mechanic was something you graduated from, not something you built upon. Among other things, I said simply. Whitman nodded approvingly. Multifaceted entrepreneurs often make the best partners. They understand both the big picture and the crucial details. Veronica looked like someone had just told her the earth was flat. Her carefully constructed worldview, where people like me stayed in their assigned boxes, was being challenged by someone whose opinion actually mattered in her social circle. "If you'll excuse me," she said stiffly, "I need to check on the dinner arrangements." She walked away with her two companions, but not before shooting me a look that promised this conversation wasn't over. Whitman watched her leave, then turned back to me. "Some people have trouble adjusting when their assumptions prove incorrect." "Yes, sir." "Good for you, son. Good for you." 4 o'clock brought disaster. I was standing near the terrace when raised voices erupted from the head table. Tristan was on his feet, pointing at a server, his face flushed with anger and alcohol. "This is unacceptable," he was saying, loud enough for half the room to hear. "I specifically requested the premium champagne service, and this is what you bring me?" The server, a young woman maybe 25, looked terrified. She held a champagne bottle in trembling hands, clearly trying to explain something. "Sir, this is the vintage you ordered," she said quietly. The venue manager confirmed. "Don't tell me what I ordered," Tristan snapped. "Do you have any idea how much this wedding cost? And you want to serve us cheap champagne?" The reception had gone quiet. Conversations stopped, heads turned, everyone suddenly focused on the scene unfolding at the head table. Evelyn sat frozen, her face pale with embarrassment. This wasn't the elegant celebration she'd imagined. This was her new husband making a scene in front of everyone who mattered in her world. "Tristan," she said quietly, putting her hand on his arm. "Please." He shrugged her off. "No, this is exactly the kind of incompetence I'm talking about. These people think they can take shortcuts because we won't notice." That's when I saw something that made my blood run cold. In his anger, Tristan had knocked over a water glass, and the contents were spreading across the white tablecloth toward a serving tray of appetizers. The server moved to clean it up, and Tristan grabbed her wrist. "Leave it," he said harshly. "You've done enough damage." The room was dead silent now. 150 people watching a man in a $3,000 suit berate a working woman for doing her job. Robert Whitman stood up from his table, his expression thunderous. As a board member, he'd seen enough inappropriate behavior to know when someone had crossed the line. But I was closer. "Excuse me," I said, walking toward the head table. My voice was calm, steady, carrying just enough volume to reach the key players without making this more of a spectacle than it already was. Tristan looked at me like I was something he'd found on the bottom of his shoe. "This doesn't concern you." "You're right," I said, "but the young lady is just doing her job." "The young lady is incompetent." I looked at the champagne bottle she was holding. Dom Perignon 2015, easily $300 a bottle, exactly the kind of premium vintage that Rosewood Country Club served at their most exclusive events. "That's excellent champagne," I said quietly. "Some of the best they carry. I don't need a mechanic telling me about wine." The word mechanic carried all the contempt he could pack into 3 syllables. In Tristan's world, that wasn't just a job description. It was a social category, a way of dismissing someone as irrelevant. "You're right," I said again. "I'm just a mechanic." The admission seemed to satisfy something in him, proof that he was dealing with someone who knew their place. "Then, I suggest you return to your table and let the adults handle this." I nodded and started to turn away. Then I stopped and looked back. "One thing, though," I said, my voice still calm but carrying a note that made people lean forward to listen. "You might want to check with the venue manager about your final payment. I heard there was some kind of bank hold." The color drained from Tristan's face. "That's been resolved," he said quickly. "I'm sure it has. Banks can be funny about large wire transfers, though, especially when they involve leveraged accounts." I wasn't making accusations. Wasn't saying anything that couldn't be explained as general knowledge about banking procedures. But the way Tristan's eyes went wide suggested I'd hit closer to the truth than either of us had expected. The champagne is excellent, I told the server gently. You're doing a great job. Then, I walked back to my spot near the bar, leaving Tristan standing at the head table with the attention of the entire reception focused on his next move. He sat down. The server finished clearing the table and disappeared into the kitchen, probably to compose herself. The reception gradually returned to life as conversations resumed and people turned back to their own tables. But something had shifted. You could feel it in the way people looked at Tristan, in the whispered conversations that followed. The confident financier who'd married into one of the city's prominent families had just been quietly, publicly reminded that his own foundation might not be as solid as it appeared. 30 minutes later, the truth started coming out. I was talking with Robert Whitman about the logistics business when I noticed a commotion near the venue office. Nessa emerged looking frazzled, followed by a man in a suit who had the bearing of someone who dealt with money for a living. They were talking in urgent, low voices, but body language spoke louder than words. Payment problem, bigger than they'd initially thought. Across the reception, I could see Tristan at the bar ordering what looked like his fourth or fifth drink. His groomsmen clustered around him, but their laughter seemed forced, defensive. Everything all right? Whitman asked, noticing my distraction. Probably just wedding coordination details. But we both knew that wasn't what we were looking at. 15 minutes later, Nessa approached the head table and spoke quietly to Tristan. Their conversation was brief, intense, and ended with Tristan's face going pale. Evelyn was watching too. I could see her trying to read her new husband's expression, probably wondering why he looked like someone had just delivered terrible news at his own wedding reception. That's when Tristan made his second mistake of the evening. He stood up again, but this time he wasn't angry. He was desperate, and desperate men make poor decisions. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his voice carrying the forced confidence of someone trying to control a situation that was slipping away. I want to thank everyone for being here today to celebrate this joyous occasion. The room quieted politely. Wedding toasts were expected, even if the timing felt off. Evelyn and I are grateful for your support as we begin this new chapter in our lives, he continued, and I want to assure everyone that despite any minor administrative delays, tonight's celebration will continue exactly as planned. Administrative delays. That was an interesting way to describe whatever crisis was unfolding behind the scenes. In fact, Tristan said, his voice getting stronger, I want to make sure everyone knows that this reception is being handled by only the finest vendors and service providers, people who understand quality, who deliver results, who... He stopped talking. His eyes had found me across the room, and I could see him putting pieces together. The vendor letter, the logistics company, the way staff had deferred to me throughout the day. Who work with established, reliable partners, he finished weakly, but the damage was done. His pause, his expression, the way his confident speech had suddenly deflated, everyone had seen it. In trying to assert control, he'd reminded the entire room that there was a problem that needed controlling. And worse, he'd inadvertently highlighted the fact that someone else, someone he'd dismissed as just a mechanic, might be part of the solution. Social dynamics were funny things. They could shift in an instant based on perception as much as reality. And right now, the perception was that Tristan Vale was scrambling while Marcus Cole remained calm. Interesting toast, Whitman murmured beside me. Everyone's nervous on their wedding day. Indeed, though some handle it better than others. Across the room, Evelyn was staring at her new husband with an expression I recognized. It was the same look she'd given me 3 years ago when I'd gotten into an argument with her mother about politics. The look of someone realizing that the person they'd chosen to stand beside them might not be as strong as they'd thought. The reception continued, but the energy had changed. Conversations were quieter, more intense. People were paying attention to details they might have missed before, watching how Tristan interacted with staff, noticing how problems seemed to resolve themselves when certain people got involved. Truth had a way of surfacing, especially when someone was trying too hard to keep it buried. By 5:30, everyone in the room understood that something was happening beneath the surface of this perfect wedding. They just weren't sure what it was yet. The answer came during dinner service. I was seated at a table near the back, thanks to Lily's intervention, with some family friends and distant relatives. Pleasant people who made polite conversation without prying too deeply into personal business. The meal was excellent. Rosewood Country Club knew how to deliver quality, and their reputation was built on attention to detail. Multiple courses, perfect presentation, service that anticipated your needs before you realized you had them. But halfway through the main course, there was another disturbance. This time, it wasn't Tristan making a scene. It was a man in a dark suit who approached the head table and spoke quietly to the venue manager. Then the venue manager approached Nessa. Then Nessa approached Tristan. The conversation was brief but intense. Tristan's face went from confident to concerned to something approaching panic in the space of 30 seconds. He stood up abruptly, nearly knocking over his chair, and followed Nessa toward the venue office. Evelyn sat at the head table, alone, watching her new husband disappear on what was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. The buzz of conversation around the room grew louder as people noticed the drama unfolding. Wedding receptions were supposed to be celebrations, not crisis management exercises. "Excuse me," said a voice beside me. I looked up to see Lily standing next to my chair, her expression tight with worry. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" I followed her to a quiet corner of the terrace, away from the crowd and the whispered speculation. "Something's wrong," she said without preamble. "Really wrong." "What do you mean?" "Tristan's in the office right now on the phone with his bank. Apparently, the payment hold isn't just an administrative delay. There's a problem with his accounts." I waited for her to continue. "Mom's freaking out. She's trying to keep it quiet, but she just asked me if Dad's credit card could cover the venue balance as a backup." The picture was getting clearer. Tristan Vale, successful financier, man about town, might not be as liquid as he appeared. And his wedding day, the day when he was supposed to prove his worth to the Hart family and their social circle, was becoming a public demonstration of his limitations. "What do you need?" I asked. Lily looked surprised. "What do I need? Marcus, I'm trying to warn you. Mom's looking for someone to blame, and right now you're the most convenient target." "How so?" "She's telling people you orchestrated this somehow, that you arranged for the payment problems to embarrass Tristan." I almost laughed. The idea that I had the power or inclination to manipulate banking systems was absurd. But in Veronica's world, where image mattered more than reality, even absurd explanations were preferable to admitting that her daughter had married someone whose finances were built on sand. "That's not how banks work, Lily." "I know that. You know that. But Mom needs someone to blame, and she's already convinced herself that you're the villain in this story." Before I could respond, we were interrupted by angry voices from inside the building. Through the open doors, we could see Tristan stalking back toward the reception, his face flushed with frustration and alcohol. Behind him, Nessa looked like someone who was rapidly running out of options. "This is about to get worse," Lily said quietly. She was right. Tristan burst back into the reception like a man with something to prove. He made a straight line for the bar, ordered something strong, and downed it in one gulp. Then he started looking around the room, his eyes searching for something or someone. When his gaze found me, his expression shifted from frustrated to furious. He was coming over. Tristan crossed the reception floor with the purposeful stride of a man who decided that his problems were someone else's fault. His face was flushed, his expensive suit slightly wrinkled from stress, and his eyes had the dangerous focus of someone who'd had too much to drink and not enough control. I stood my ground near the terrace doors, hands relaxed at my sides, watching him approach. Around us, conversations quieted as people sensed the tension building. You, Tristan said, pointing at me with the kind of dramatic gesture that belonged on a stage, not at a wedding reception. You orchestrated this. Orchestrated what? Don't play games with me. The payment delays, the vendor complications, all of it. You planned this to humiliate me. His voice carried across the room, loud enough that every guest could hear him. Tables of elegantly dressed people turned to watch, their faces showing a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. This wasn't how wedding receptions were supposed to unfold. I'm just a guest, I said calmly. You're just a mechanic who can't accept that his ex-wife moved on to better things. The words came out sharp and bitter, designed to cut deep. You orchestrated this whole thing because you can't stand seeing Evelyn with a real man. The silence that followed was deafening. 150 people holding their breath, waiting to see how this confrontation would play out. I looked at Tristan for a long moment. This man who'd married the woman I'd loved, who'd built his confidence on putting other people down, who thought that volume and aggression could solve any problem. I didn't have to, I said quietly. The words hung in the air like a challenge, simple, direct, carrying more weight than a long speech could have managed. What's that supposed to mean? I didn't have to orchestrate anything. I just had to show up. Tristan's face went from red to purple. You arrogant Mr. Vale. Nessa's voice cut through the tension like a blade. She approached our small circle with her professional smile firmly in place, but I could see the steel underneath. Perhaps we could discuss the administrative matters privately? No, Tristan said, not taking his eyes off me. I want everyone to know what kind of man this is, the kind who sabotages other people's happiness because he can't have his own. Around us, guests were shifting uncomfortably. This was supposed to be a celebration, not a public confrontation. But nobody seemed willing to intervene, perhaps because they sensed that something important was being resolved. Marcus didn't sabotage anything. Lily's voice came from behind me. She stepped into our circle, her face pale but determined. The only person who's embarrassing himself here is you, Tristan. Lily, stay out of this. Veronica's voice snapped from across the room. She was moving toward us with quick, angry steps, clearly intending to control the situation. But Robert Whitman was closer. Gentlemen, he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent decades managing difficult situations. Perhaps this conversation would be better suited to a private setting. Tristan looked around the circle of faces, Lily, Nessa, Whitman, me, and seemed to realize that his audience wasn't as sympathetic as he'd expected. Fine, he said, his voice still loud enough to carry. But I want everyone to understand what's happening here. This man, he pointed at me again, is trying to ruin my wedding because he's jealous. Sir, Nessa said quietly, your banking situation isn't Mr. Cole's responsibility. The words dropped into the conversation like a stone into still water. Banking situation, spoken aloud in front of the social elite who mattered in this world. Tristan's expression shifted from anger to something approaching panic. There is no banking situation, he said quickly. Just administrative delays. Nothing that can't be resolved. But the damage was done. Everyone had heard Nessa's words, and everyone understood what they implied. The successful financier was having money problems on his wedding day, in front of everyone who mattered. Of course, Whitman said diplomatically, these things happen. Though I have to say, it's fortunate that your logistics partners were able to maintain vendor confidence during the delay. He was talking about Reed Cole Logistics, about the vendor letter that had kept the reception running when Tristan's payments failed to clear. What logistics partners? Veronica had arrived, her voice sharp with suspicion. Whitman looked genuinely surprised by the question. Reed Cole Logistics, of course. Mr. Cole's company handled vendor coordination and backup services quite professionally, from what I observed. The silence that followed was different from before. This wasn't tension, this was revelation. Veronica's face went through several expressions in quick succession: confusion, disbelief, and finally something that looked like comprehension mixed with horror. Company? She said faintly. Indeed. Though I have to say, Mr. Cole, you've been quite modest about your business interests. When we spoke earlier, I had the impression you were primarily in automotive services. Among other things, I said, using the same phrase I'd used before. What other things? Tristan demanded. He looked like a man who just realized he was missing crucial information about a situation he thought he understood. Before I could answer, Dante appeared beside our group. He'd been handling coordination from the background all day, but apparently decided it was time to step forward. Logistics, transportation, vendor management, Dante said easily. We've been building the business for about 3 years now. Nothing fancy, just reliable service. 3 years, Lily repeated quietly. She was doing the math, realizing that Marcus had been building a business empire while married to her sister, while being dismissed as just a mechanic by her family. Tristan looked like someone had just told him the rules of the game had changed midway through. You're telling me he's, what, some kind of businessman? Among other things, Whitman said with a slight smile, though I have to say, true gentlemen don't make a habit of broadcasting their successes. They simply deliver results when called upon. The implication was clear. Marcus Cole had quietly solved problems and supported people all day, while Tristan Vale had made noise and created drama. This is ridiculous, Veronica said, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. Marcus works at an auto shop. He owns part of an auto shop, Dante corrected gently, along with the logistics company, and a few other investments we keep quiet about. I could see the mental calculations happening in real time. 3 years of marriage to Evelyn. 3 years of being treated like someone who didn't quite measure up to their standards. And all the while, building something they'd never bothered to notice or ask about. How? Evelyn's voice was barely above a whisper. I turned to see her standing a few feet away, having left the head table to see what the commotion was about. How did I not know? You never asked, I said simply. The truth of it hit her like a physical blow. For 3 years, she'd made assumptions about who I was and what I was capable of. She'd seen the coveralls and the grease under my fingernails and stopped looking deeper. But you never said, would it have mattered? She opened her mouth to answer, then stopped, because we both knew the truth. Her family's judgment had been based on appearances, not substance, on social categories rather than actual capability. And now, on her wedding day, surrounded by everyone whose opinion mattered in her world, she was learning that the man she divorced for not being ambitious enough had been quietly building an empire while she wasn't paying attention. This is insane, Tristan said, but his voice sounded hollow. You're all acting like this mechanic is some kind of businessman. He is, Whitman said firmly, and frankly, Mr. Vale, your inability to recognize competence when you see it says more about your judgment than his qualifications. The criticism landed with the force of a slap. Robert Whitman was a respected member of the community, someone whose opinion carried weight, and he was publicly calling into question Tristan's judgment. Furthermore, Whitman continued, I've observed Mr. Cole's conduct today, and I can tell you that he's handled himself with considerably more grace under pressure than some others I could mention. He was talking about the server incident, about Tristan's public display of temper and arrogance. Grace under pressure, Lily repeated. That's exactly right. Veronica looked like someone had just rearranged her understanding of the universe. The social order she'd spent decades navigating had shifted beneath her feet, and she was struggling to find her footing. I think, Nessa said diplomatically, that we should perhaps focus on enjoying the celebration. But the celebration was already over. Oh, the reception would continue. People would finish their meals, make polite conversation, dance to the string quartet. But the real event had already concluded. Everyone in the room now understood that Marcus Cole wasn't just the ex-husband who'd been invited to be humiliated. He was a successful businessman who'd been quietly solving problems while everyone else created them. And Tristan Vale wasn't the confident financier he'd appeared to be. He was a man whose wedding day had revealed the cracks in his carefully constructed image. 20 minutes later, I was standing alone on the terrace when Evelyn found me. She approached slowly, like someone walking through a minefield. Her wedding dress rustled softly in the evening breeze, and her carefully styled hair had started to come loose around her face. "Were you always this steady?" she asked quietly. I looked at her for a moment. 3 years of marriage, and she was asking about steadiness like it was a foreign concept. "I didn't change," I said. "I stopped trying to prove." "Prove what?" "That I belonged. That I was good enough. That I deserved to be taken seriously." She was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications of what I'd said. "I hurt you," she said finally. "Yes, I hurt you, and you still came today. Why?" I thought about her question, about all the reasons I'd told myself for attending this wedding. To prove a point, to show that I wasn't broken, to demonstrate that I could handle seeing her with someone else. But standing there on the terrace, watching her struggle with the reality of what she'd lost, I realized the real reason had been simpler. "Because I needed to know who I was without you," I said, "and I needed you to see it too." Tears were forming in her eyes, careful makeup starting to smudge. And now? Now I know. Lily appeared in the doorway behind us, holding a tissue. She approached her sister with the kind of gentle concern that family members show when someone they love is falling apart. "Eve," she said softly, offering the tissue. Evelyn took it and dabbed carefully at her eyes. "I made a mistake, didn't I?" Neither Lily nor I answered immediately. Some truths were too heavy to be spoken aloud, especially on someone's wedding day. "You made a choice," I said finally. "We all did." She nodded, understanding. There was no going back, no way to undo the decisions that had led us to this moment. She was married to Tristan now, for better or worse, and I was free to build whatever life I chose. "I should go back inside," she said. "People will notice if the bride is missing." She started to leave, then turned back. "Marcus." "Yeah? Be happy. Please, be happy." I watched her walk back into the reception, her sister beside her, two women navigating the complicated aftermath of a day that was supposed to be perfect. Dante appeared beside me a few minutes later with a knowing smile and a set of car keys. "Contracts ready," he said, dangling the keys in front of me. "Client pickup, standard rate." I looked at the keys. They belonged to the Lamborghini that had been part of our classic car rental pool. Nothing dramatic, just a beautiful machine that someone had requested for the evening. "Time to go?" I asked. "Unless you want to stick around for cake and dancing." I could hear music starting up inside the reception. The string quartet had been replaced by a small jazz ensemble, and guests were beginning to migrate toward the dance floor. The party would continue for hours. People would drink champagne and make toasts and pretend that the evening had unfolded exactly as planned. But my part in this story was finished. I walked back inside to find Nessa near the gift table, checking something on her clipboard. When she saw me approaching, she looked up with a genuine smile. "Thank you," I said, extending my hand, "for your professionalism today." "Thank you for your help," she replied, shaking my hand firmly. "The logistics coordination made my job much easier." I could feel eyes watching us, guests noting the respectful interaction between the wedding planner and the man who'd been dismissed as irrelevant just hours earlier. Next, I found Lily near the dance floor, talking quietly with some family friends. "Be good to yourself," I told her. She hugged me quickly, fiercely. "Thank you for coming, and thank you for being you." I made my way toward the exit, stopping to nod goodbye to Robert Whitman and a few other guests who'd been kind throughout the evening. No grand gestures, no dramatic speeches, just a man leaving a party when his business was finished. The Lamborghini was waiting in the parking circle, sleek and silver under the evening lights. Dante's runner, a young guy from the shop who sometimes helped with deliveries, was standing beside it with the paperwork. "All set, Mr. Cole," he said, handing me the keys and a rental agreement. "Standard evening rate, return by midnight." I signed the paperwork and handed him a tip, then climbed into the driver's seat. The leather was soft, the engine purred quietly, and everything about the car spoke of quality and precision. As I started to pull away, I noticed a small crowd of guests watching from the reception entrance. Whispered conversations, pointing fingers, the kind of speculation that would fuel social media posts and gossip for weeks. The man they dismissed as a mechanic was driving away in a Lamborghini, not because he was showing off, but because he'd booked it like any other client, paid for it with money he'd earned through years of steady work. In the rearview mirror, I could see Evelyn standing in the doorway, watching me leave. Our eyes met for a brief moment, bride to ex-husband, past to present, and then I turned the corner and she was gone. The drive through the city was peaceful. Windows cracked, cool evening air flowing through the cabin, the steady hum of an engine that had been built by people who understood their craft. I drove past the shop, past the duplex where I lived, through neighborhoods I'd known my whole life. Nothing dramatic, just a man moving through his world at his own pace. At a red light near downtown, I pulled out my phone and texted Dante. "Invoice runner. Standard rate." His response came back immediately. "Already done. Profit split as usual." That was the beauty of working with someone who understood your values. No conversation needed about whether tonight had changed anything. It hadn't. We were still partners, still building something together, still focused on the long-term vision rather than short-term drama. The light turned green, and I drove on. By 10:30, I was back at my duplex, having returned the car to the rental location and caught a ride home with the runner. I changed out of the gray suit and hung it carefully in the closet, then filed the rental receipt with the rest of my business paperwork. Just another Saturday night. Just another business transaction. The following week passed quietly. Mrs. Alvarez brought empanadas to the shop on Tuesday, the way she did every month. I tuned engines, balanced books, and handled the steady flow of customers who'd been coming to Reed Cole Auto for years. On Wednesday, Lily sent a simple text. "We're fine. Thank you." On Friday, Nessa sent an email thanking us for our professionalism and requesting a quote for upcoming events. Business as usual. Dante and I split the week's profits on Friday evening, the same way we'd done for 3 years. The wedding had brought in some additional logistics fees, but nothing that changed our routine or our plans. "Good week," Dante said, sealing his envelope. "Yeah, good week." That was all that needed to be said. We'd handled a complicated situation with dignity, delivered quality service under pressure, and maintained our standards throughout. The rest was just noise. 2 weeks later, I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that there had been some social ripples from the wedding. Veronica's standing in her circle had taken a hit when word spread about how she'd treated the man who'd actually kept the event running smoothly. Tristan's financial difficulties had become public knowledge, leading to some uncomfortable questions about his business practices and personal management. The marriage was holding together, but the gloss of success had worn off. I didn't take pleasure in any of it. Their struggles weren't my victory. My victory was simpler. I knew who I was, and now everyone else did too. 3 weeks after the wedding, I was walking to my truck after closing the shop when I noticed a familiar car at the red light down the street. Evelyn's silver BMW, idling at the intersection near Franklin and 3rd. Through the windshield, I could see her sitting behind the wheel, looking toward the row of shops where I worked. There was a Lamborghini parked outside Tony's coffee shop, probably belonged to some client conducting business over espresso and pastries. Nothing unusual about that. Classic cars were becoming more common in this part of the city as the area developed, but I could see Evelyn staring at it, probably wondering if it was connected to me, probably remembering the night she'd watched me drive away from her wedding. The light turned green. She sat for a moment longer, then drove on. I got in my truck and headed home, father's watch ticking steady in my pocket. Some things lasted if you took care of them. Time would tell which things mattered and which were just noise. Behind me, the city continued its evening routine. Lights coming on in office buildings, people heading home to families and dinners, and the quiet satisfaction of another day's work completed. And somewhere in the expensive part of town, a woman was learning to live with the choices she'd made, occasionally wondering about the life she'd walked away from when she'd mistaken steadiness for limitation. The watch kept ticking, the world kept turning, and I kept moving forward, building something that would last.